Congratulations, Android, you made it another year. How long has it been? Okay, it's been 1 year since we started getting the betas and the updates of Android Oreo. Now it's out to the public, and Android Oreo is running on a grand total of... Really good job, Google. That's almost 2%. Gotta hand it to him. That's pretty good. What's iOS at now? Never mind that. Let's talk about Android P. So, as we've known before, I'll try to keep this a little bit more real now. Android, because of all of its customization, because of all the skins and the packs that carriers put on it, other companies put on it, and just third parties like Nova Launcher make pretty good skins, there's not a lot of stock Android changes that Google themselves can really make because it's so customizable. This is kind of the recurring problem I think I see with Android updates, is that there's not much you can change because so much of Android is designed to be customizable, to be changed throughout. So what can Google really do other than, favor the stock Android fans? Which is really what I think Android P is becoming more about, because as we know, most smartphones do not get the latest version of Android, or if they do, it's much, much later after it's come out, and at that point it's dated. Compared to other phones like the Pixel, which is definitely going to get the latest version of Android as soon as it's available, and there are some Pixel viewers out there, so these changes are for you. A lot of these changes include things like having a magnifying glass when you're holding and trying to move your cursor across when trying where to type things in text, which is interesting because that's a feature iOS had a long time ago, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm glad to see Android P is getting it. But anyway, being able to move around the cursor, that's cool. They also introduced this new mode called Lockdown, which means that it'll disable your biometrics, so if in a crucial moment someone wanted to force your finger onto the fingerprint reader, it won't work. It'll be forced to use the PIN, which, if you didn't know, is a very similar feature you can do on iPhones. If you activate the boot off animation and then just hit cancel, it requires a passcode. Face ID will not work. Touch ID will not work. Very helpful thing that I really enjoy on my iPhone 10, now extending to Pixel owners. And how could we forget, of course, Knotch support? Now, a lot of people I don't think really got the joke last time I brought up the idea that the big feature of Android P is that you can add a notch into the display, which I just thought was silly, but my joke was not that you add that so you can pretend you have a notch. I understand that they add it there for developers so they can get their apps used to having a notch on the display. I got that part of it. It just made me laugh that when it comes to big Android P updates, pretty much everyone who talks about their favorite Android P changes has to bring that up. Like, that's the only thing we can mention. Why should we upgrade to Android P? Putting a notch into the display, which to me, I don't really understand. Essential was able to adopt their phone and their apps and their operating system to a display with a notch on it. They didn't need Google's help. Apple also did not add notch support for iOS 11 before the iPhone 10 came out. That was kind of unnecessary. And do developers really need a software queue to understand how apps will work? I mean, can developers not just put a piece of tape on the display and be like, okay, there won't be any data there? Thank you, Google, for doing all the work for us, for adding in a notch. Plus, a lot of people out there say the Pixel 3 won't have a notch because Pixel mode is the mode without a notch. But my point is, if Android's trying to push developers to start getting their apps ready for having a notch, that's one of the big feature changes with Android P, then that likely means the Pixel 3 is going forward with it. Besides all the other Android phones already switching to a notch, Google very blatantly going after Apple's hardware team of, who needs a headphone jack? I could easily see them adopting the notch as well. It would not surprise me in the slightest. Another interesting tidbit of Android P is now when you take screenshots, you can mark them up, which is a very handy feature I found on my iPhone. You can take a screenshot, open it here, and just start drawing on it with different tools. Very quick and easy to remember. Another interesting tad bit of data is that they've now moved the time, the clock in the widgets on the top part of the screen, to the left. Not really sure why. Maybe they thought that was better. On an unrelated note, the time on the iPhone 10 is also on the left once they added in the notch. So, random fact. Just thought I'd bring that up. We also, with every software update, see a little bit of change to the control center, where you swipe down from the top now, instead of having the icons you had before, you have more rounded off icons that look like circles that just happen to be blue. This is the new design approach. They're trying to make it a bit more vibrant with colors. And throughout the OS, you'll notice some more changes when it just comes to rounded off edges instead of squares and rectangles, like the search tab in the settings app, which also happens to look a lot like the search tab in the top of the settings app. Speaking of the settings app, they've got a couple of redesigns in there as well, because now every section has its own colorful icon. Interesting, just like iOS, which I very much enjoy. So I don't know if you can tell with all the points I'm bringing up, but a lot of the biggest changes that are coming to Android Android seem to be things that iOS has already. Now, before you freak out and just jump to the comment section, I don't think that's a bad thing. All companies copy each other. I'm not trying to make the accusation that iOS is purely original. There are tons of things iOS has taken from Android over the years, but there is one key difference with Google and Apple playing catch up with each other with different software platforms. Android P is going to be coming after Oreo, and Oreo, as of February, is only running on 1.1% of Android devices. So while we may see these operating systems getting neck and neck, the majority of Android users are not going to see these features for another year or 2 years or even 3 years. Even Android Nougat is not that popular. The majority of Android devices are running operating systems from 3 to 4 years ago. You can't say the same thing about iOS. Most people adapt to the latest version of iOS as soon as it's available. So you can decide for yourself what's better, having phones that are readily updatable to the latest version of an operating system, or having a vast majority of phones to choose from, or having to stick with just straight from Google the Pixel lineup, which already has a lot of controversy around it. Not a lot of people into it, and the sales prove that. If you're part of that small chunk of the market, if you happen to be the Pixel buyer, then I guess you get that small experience of what having an iPhone is like if it were under Google. These changes do not surprise me, to be honest, because a lot of what the design team has done for the Pixel 2 is not too far apart from Apple. Even the original Pixel to me looked very, very similar to an iPhone 6S with the aluminum back, the cell band, and just the overall bezel layout. Making fun of Apple for removing the headphone jack and then following through with it later, now adding Knotch support. To me, it's pretty clear what they're trying to do. They're trying to give you the closest thing to an iOS experience, but do it without Apple. So those are my impressions of Android P. But oh yeah, all we really have to talk about when doing an Android P video is, of course, what's it gonna be called? We got Peppermint, we got Popsicle. There's a lot of P names they can go with. Psoriasis. Maybe I'll very much identify and appreciate this operating system. Android Pterodactyl. Or you know what? Actually, I've got an even better one. This one might actually make sense. They could call it Android Pie. As in Android P-I. As in it's kind of the dessert if you add in the E. But at the same time, Pi is in 3.14. As in your phone's not going to get Android P for another 3.14 years. Okay, I'll stop. That's enough. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.